The world is on fire, and you need to understand exactly what is happening and why it matters to you right now. 2,000 drones. Let that number sink in for a second. 2,000, not a warning shot, not a symbolic gesture. 2,000 autonomous killing machines launched simultaneously from the Islamic Republic of Iran, screaming across the night sky toward Israel, toward Tel Aviv, toward the IDF. This is not a headline from some distant war that has nothing to do with your life. This is the reshaping of the entire global order happening in real time. And if you think the United States isn't woven into every single thread of this conflict, then you haven't been paying close enough attention. This began when Israel bombed Iranian military and nuclear facilities in a surprise attack, assassinating prominent military leaders, nuclear scientists, and politicians. That was the spark. But what we are watching now is the explosion that came after the spark, and it is consuming everything in its path. So let's talk about what this actually means, because the mainstream media is going to give you the polished version, the sanitized version, the version that fits neatly inside a 2-minute broadcast. You deserve the full picture. You deserve the truth. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran, targeting military and government sites. And in those strikes, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself was assassinated. Now, think about what that means. The Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, a man who had survived 4 decades of pressure, sanctions, proxy wars, and covert operations, was eliminated. And you think Iran was going to absorb that quietly? You think Tehran was going to sit in the rubble of its leadership structure and simply negotiate? No. Iran codenamed its military response Operation True Promise I-4, and they unleashed everything they had. Iran entered 2026 with an estimated 2,500 ballistic missiles, and on day one of the conflict, they launched 480 ballistic missiles and 720 drones. Those are numbers that should stop you cold. The United States military hasn't seen an adversary fire that many projectiles in a single day since the most intense periods of the Second World War. And yet here we are, watching it happen on our phones, on our tablets, refreshing our news feeds like it's some kind of spectator sport. But this isn't a sport. This is the real geopolitical architecture of the 21st century being blown apart and rebuilt in real time. And the United States of America is standing in the middle of that construction zone without a hard hat. The Trump administration gave diverse and inconsistent explanations for starting the war: to forestall Iranian retaliation, to stop an imminent threat, to destroy Iran's missile capabilities, to prevent a nuclear weapon, to seize Iran's oil resources, and to achieve regime change. Now, I want you to hear that list carefully, because when a government gives you 6 different justifications for the same action, what they're really telling you is that none of those justifications is complete enough to stand on its own. Each one of those reasons is a piece of a puzzle, and when you put the puzzle together, what you see is a picture of a superpower that is trying to reassert dominance over a region that has been slowly slipping out of its grasp for the better part of 2 decades. The initial stage of the campaign prioritized degrading Iranian air defenses, reportedly striking roughly 200 systems, and the strikes enabled the U.S. and Israel to establish effective control of the airspace from western Iran to central Tehran within 24 hours. That is a military achievement by any measure. But military achievements don't always translate into strategic victories, and that is the lesson that every empire in history has had to learn the hard way. You can dominate the skies, you can shut down every airport, destroy every radar installation, silence every anti-aircraft battery, but you cannot bomb an ideology into submission. You cannot destroy the will of a people from 30,000 feet. The Iranians have known that lesson for a long time. They've been preparing for this moment for decades, and now that moment is here. Since the 2026 Iran war began, locations across Israel have been subject to multiple retaliatory Iranian missile strikes. And despite a robust system of missile defense, Iranian missiles struck multiple positions across the country. Tel Aviv, a city of over 4 million people, a city of cafes and startups and university students and families, that city has been under siege. The largest death toll was in a strike on March 1st that targeted a residential neighborhood in Beit Shemesh, killing 9 Israeli civilians, 9 people in a synagogue, gone. That's not a statistic. Those are grandparents, those are parents, those are kids. And when you hear those numbers and you feel that weight, I want you to also understand that this scale of suffering is happening on multiple sides of this conflict simultaneously. This is what war does. This is what war has always done. And the question America has to ask itself, the question you have to ask yourself, is whether we are making this better or whether we are pouring gasoline onto a fire that was already burning. Iran struck Israeli targets in Tel Aviv and Haifa, as well as multiple countries throughout the Persian Gulf region, with major targets including Bahrain's capital, Manama, Kuwait International Airport, the UAE's capital, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and Eastern Province in Saudi Arabia. Do you understand what this means for the global economy? The Persian Gulf is not just a body of water on a map. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Every time a missile lands near an oil facility, every time a drone disrupts a shipping lane, the entire global supply chain shudders. An Iranian missile and drone strike caused significant damage to the Emirates' global aluminium site in Abu Dhabi, forcing a shutdown of facilities. Aluminium. That feeds into every industry on Earth: aerospace, automotive, construction, consumer electronics. The cost of this war isn't being paid only by the soldiers and civilians in the direct line of fire. It's being paid at your gas pump. It's being paid in the price of your groceries. It's being paid in the inflation numbers that the Federal Reserve is staring at with growing anxiety. This conflict is not contained. It never was. Iran distributed fire across 13 countries, overwhelming regional air defenses and forcing every Gulf state into the conflict. 13 countries. Let that land. This is not a bilateral conflict between Iran and Israel. This is a regional war that has absorbed the entire Middle East, with the United States carrying the military weight on one side and Iran absorbing punishment while still managing to keep the entire region in chaos. The data confirmed that the UAE absorbed far more total projectiles than Israel, with 1,468 projectiles versus 392. The United Arab Emirates, America's key partner in Gulf stability, a country that signed the Abraham Accords, a country that has invested billions in normalization with Israel and alignment with Washington, that country is now absorbing more Iranian fire than Israel itself. What does that tell you about the strategic landscape? It tells you that Iran is playing a different game than the one you see reported on cable news. Iran isn't just trying to hurt Israel. Iran is trying to destabilize every American-aligned government in the region simultaneously. That is a far more sophisticated strategy than most analysts in Washington have been willing to admit publicly. The Israeli military believes that Iran still has more than 1,000 ballistic missiles that can reach Israel, and at the start of the war, the IDF assessed that Iran had 2,500 ballistic missiles. So even after weeks of the most intense aerial bombardment since the Second World War, even after the United States deployed B-1 and B-2 bombers, even after 3,000 Iranian targets were struck across 30 of Iran's 31 provinces, Iran still has the capacity to reach Tel Aviv. That is a statement about the fundamental limits of air power. That is a statement about what happens when a nation has spent 40 years dispersing, hardening, and redundantly positioning its military infrastructure specifically because it always knew this day might come. The Iranians were not caught off guard by this war. They were ready for it. And readiness doesn't mean you don't suffer. It means you don't break. Efforts led by Pakistan, with support from Turkey and Egypt, to mediate a ceasefire between the United States and Iran have hit a dead end. Think about that diplomatic picture for a moment. Pakistan, a nuclear-armed nation of 240 million people. Turkey, a NATO member, America's alliance partner. Egypt, America's largest recipient of military aid in the Arab world. All three of those countries are trying to stop this war, and all three of them are failing, because a ceasefire requires both sides to believe that stopping serves their interest better than continuing. And right now, neither side has reached that calculation. Washington believes it can degrade Iran's conventional military capacity to a point where Tehran can no longer threaten Israel or the Gulf states. Tehran believes it can sustain enough punishment on enough American partners to make the political cost of continuing unbearable in Washington. Somebody is going to be wrong about their math, and the people who pay for that mathematical error are always the civilians. The IRGC claimed that it struck the USS Abraham Lincoln with 4 missiles. Now, that claim has not been fully verified, and militaries on both sides have every incentive to shape the information environment in their favor. But even the existence of that claim, even the possibility that Iranian missiles could reach an American aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, represents a seismic shift in the military calculus of this region. For decades, American naval power was the ultimate deterrent in the Middle East. The carrier strike group was the argument ender. You send a carrier and the message is clear. Do not push this further. But Iran has spent 20 years developing anti-ship ballistic missiles, the Khalij Fars, the Hormuz, the Zulfiqar, specifically to challenge that assumption, specifically to make American naval power something that bleeds. And now we're in a conflict where the deterrent has been tested, where the myth of invulnerability is being stress tested in real time. The International Atomic Energy Agency said said that while Iran has an ambitious nuclear power program and refused to allow inspections of its damaged sites, there was no evidence of an ongoing nuclear weapons program. Read that sentence again. The IAEA, the international body specifically tasked with monitoring nuclear weapons proliferation, said there was no evidence of an active weapons program, and yet this war was partly sold to the American public on the premise of stopping a nuclear Iran. So we need to ask hard questions. We need to ask who benefits from a Middle East in permanent conflict. We need to ask why the United States, at a moment when its own infrastructure is crumbling, when its own working class is under enormous economic pressure, is directing billions of dollars of military resources into a conflict that the IAEA says was not even justified on the terms most loudly stated by its architects. The strikes were codenamed Operation Roaring Lion in Israel and Operation Epic Fury in the United States. Epic Fury. Those are the words American military planners chose to describe this campaign. Epic Fury, not Operation Lasting Peace, not Operation Stabilizing Force, Epic Fury. Language matters. Names matter. The names governments give to wars tell you something about the emotional and strategic framework inside which those wars are conceived. This is not a surgical operation designed to achieve a specific measurable political objective and then end. This is fury, and fury, by definition, is not precise. Fury burns everything it touches, including the things you didn't mean to burn. Between February 28th and March 4th alone, AC-led recorded more than 90 attempted strikes by Iran against Israel, with around 20 directly hitting civilian areas and resulting in at least 10 people killed. And that 5-day total, that body count from just the opening days, represented more than 60% of all Iranian attacks recorded during the entire 12-day war in June 2025. This conflict is orders of magnitude more intense than what came before it. The escalation curve has gone nearly vertical, and escalation curves that go vertical do not gently plateau. They either break the thing they're climbing or they come down hard and fast. 9 months after the 12-day war, in February 2026, Israel and the United States launched strikes on Iran, beginning the 2026 war. 9 months. That's how long the ceasefire lasted. That's how long the diplomacy held. 9 months. And what happened in those 9 months? Iran rebuilt. Iran rebuilt its arsenal far beyond pre-June 2025 levels, entering 2026 with an estimated 2,500 ballistic missiles. So the lesson that Tehran learned from the first war was rebuild faster, dig deeper, disperse wider. And the lesson Washington and Tel Aviv apparently took from the same war was we need to hit them again, harder, sooner. When both sides take military lessons from the ceasefire was never really peace. It was just a pause. And we are living in the consequence of that pause right now. Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu both warned of the potential threat of nuclear weapons in Iran and called on the Iranian people to overthrow their government. Now there's a strategy. Bomb a country, kill its supreme leader, and then call on the survivors to rise up and install a government more to your liking. America has tried this strategy before in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan. Each time the outcome was a fractured state, a power vacuum, and a humanitarian catastrophe that outlasted every optimistic projection by a decade or more. The Iranian people are proud, ancient, and deeply nationalistic. Bombing them does not make them love Washington. Historically, it does precisely the opposite. It makes the hardliners look correct. It makes the reformers look naive. It closes the space for internal political change by giving every Iranian, regardless of their feelings about the Islamic Republic, a common enemy to unite against. Iran's missile fire on Israel slowed to around 10 to 15 missiles a day in recent weeks, down from around 90 on the first day of the war. And some in Washington are pointing to that reduction as evidence of success, as evidence that the strategy is working. But I want you to think carefully about what that number actually means, because 10 to 15 ballistic missiles per day aimed at a country the size of New Jersey is not a defeated adversary. That is an adversary who is being methodical. That is an adversary who is managing its remaining inventory with discipline, who is choosing its moments, who is demonstrating staying power. The question is not whether Iran still has missiles. The question is what kind of Iran emerges from this war and what it decides to do in the decade that follows. That's the strategic question that nobody in Washington seems to be asking loudly enough. The sky over Tel Aviv is orange with fire and filled with the sound of air defense systems trying to catch what they can. And somewhere in the Pentagon and somewhere in the Knesset and somewhere in the bunkers of Tehran, military planners are running their calculations, updating their models, deciding what comes next. The rest of us are watching, but watching is not enough anymore. You have to understand what you're watching. You have to ask the questions that the comfortable version of this story doesn't ask, because the decisions being made right now, the missiles being fired right now, are going to shape the world your children and grandchildren inherit. And that means this war, as distant as it might feel from your living room in the United States of America, belongs to you. It is being fought in your name, and you deserve to know exactly what is being done in that name and why, and at what cost to the human beings on every side of these lines.